Hello everybody. This is the second class of web tools for content providers. We are going to be going over XML fundamentals, and as I say at the beginning of each of these classes, unless I make an egregious mistake, I'm just going to roll with it and keep going. Small mistakes are okay. Egregious mistakes mean I will start over again. As you can see, I just fixed a small mistake there. I had the incorrect date on this slide, so I just erased it, and I do not consider that to be egregious, so off we go. I also have my golden retriever pup here by my side, so if he barks or starts to squirm or make egregious noises, that may also make me stop my presentation, but here we go. XML fundamentals for the class Web Tools for Content Providers. Here we go. These slides cover the concepts in the second session, XML fundamentals. Some of the slides are repeats from class 1. This is an online session. View the video and follow the instructions along the way. So what that means is that I will ask you to do exercises along the way, so you can pause the video and do whatever is required in the exercise. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. As I often say, the best way to have me answer a question in a timely way is to send me an email. Okay, so this week we'll be going over XML fundamentals. What is XML? Why do we care? Elements versus attributes, well-formed versus valid, and we'll look at XSLT. Hopefully you've had a chance to do the required reading for this class. I did ask you to go to the W3 Schools XML tutorials and read all the tutorials except for the ones that I have listed here. So you skip these, but do the other tutorials. And then of course next week is an in-class session, and these are the things that you should expect in that in-class session. So preparing for today's exercise, please install a good text editor. There are many text editors available. For Windows, I would recommend Notepad++. For Mac, I would recommend Sublime Text for Mac, or Text Wrangler. I believe Text Wrangler is now called BB Edit. So BB Edit is the same thing. It's available in free mode. And also become comfortable navigating the Windows command line or the Mac command line. We'll be navigating the command line in this session, and there are some nice tutorials here for either Windows or Mac, depending on what your preference is. So that's preparation. Let's start this class right off with an exercise. We're going to create a Web Tools for Content Providers workspace. So the first step is that we're going to create a folder on our desktop and name it WT4CP. And inside that folder, we're going to create more folders. One for admin, data, downloads, slides, translate, and XML. So let's go ahead and I'm going to do that exercise. So I'm going to minimize this slide deck. I'm going to create right on my desktop by right-clicking and creating new. I'll create a folder, and I'm going to call it WT4CP and enter. If you're doing it on Mac, it will be a slightly different procedure. I think that these are things that you should be able to do, creating new folders. If you need help creating folders, let me know. I'd be happy to help you out either on Mac or Linux or on Windows. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it admin, and then I'll create another folder and I'll call it data, D-I-T-A, all caps, and then I'll create a new folder here. These are case sensitive, so please do it the same way that the slide shows. Downloads. Okay. and slides, and translate, and XML. Okay, so now we have all the slides that we need for this exercise. Download everything from the D to L course content resource tabs into your downloads folder. So let's take a look at that. We have in this folder a lot of files. I would recommend that you go ahead and download them all into your downloads directory through the miracle in order to save the miracle of time. In order to save time, I've already downloaded all of those into a separate directory, so I'm just going to drag these over into my downloads directory here. But you would actually, and this is just to save us time I don't want to make you sit through all of my downloads, but these are all the downloads from here to the downloads directory in our WT4CP folder. Okay, so then we have successfully completed the first exercise. Let's continue. Let's get into XML. Why all the excitement about XML? XML is not a new technology. It's not a sexy technology. It's not cutting edge. It's not the latest thing. It's not what people are blogging about. It's not in a fancy new thing that everybody cares about. But it is at the heart of most things. If you look in your phone, on the website, and content management systems, in your car, you'll find XML everywhere. So why do we care? Or what is this XML? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. You can see it's a W3C World Wide Web Consortium standard at the URL shown on the screen. XML is a text-based markup format. XML is a method for creating, editing, storing, and processing electronic data and documents. XML is ubiquitous. XML is the standard in which data is modeled. It's the standard in which HTML is modeled. It's the standard in which XLIF is modeled. We talked about this a little bit in the first class. So why do we care? This class is about web tools for content providers. Nearly all web tools use an XML vocabulary. Browsers render HTML. HTML is a XML vocabulary. Content providers more and more use component content management systems and XML tools to create and manage content. Content providers are expected to manage translation of content. Translation tools use XML. A good web content provider understands XML and can troubleshoot at the code level. And don't be afraid by that. If you've never done troubleshooting at the code level, it's not as scary as it sounds. So this is rendered XML. This is the website from about 4 years ago. Looks semi-familiar. This is all XML. This is the code view of that XML that was just displayed there. Here's a snip of that code view. And you can tell for yourself if you if you right-click and pick View Page Source, then you'll be able to see the XML. And the fact that we have a doctype declaration that refers to a DTD here, that tells us that this is XML. The underlying XML, on the right-hand side, we have this div, and it has some XML elements in the form of HTML. And then when we render that in the browser, it shows as nicely formatted information in our browser. So XML elements and attributes. Hint, hint, this will probably be on the quiz. So I'm going to explain the differences between elements and attributes, because we'll talk a lot about these when we delve into HTML and when we delve into data and when we delve into XLIF. Knowing the difference between an element and an attribute is important. So here we go. XML elements. An XML element is the most basic XML building block. Every XML file must have at least one XML element. An XML element can consist of just one. An XML file can consist of just one element, but they seldom, if ever, do. Elements have names. Names begin with a letter, a certain Unicode value defined here at the World Wide Web Consortium URL shown here. An underscore or a colon can be optionally followed by any combination of letters, digits, underscores, colons, and periods. An element versus a tag. Elements have a start tag and an end tag. In the case of empty elements, the end tag is implied. A start tag has a less than character followed by a name, followed by 0 or more attributes, followed by a greater than character. An example would be here. So we have our less than character. We have our element name. In this case, the element is named concept. We have a space, and then we have an attribute called ID. ID equals, and then the value of this of the ID in this case is C1, and that's enclosed in it can be either single quotes or double quotes. And then we have the greater than sign, which tells us that's the end of that tag. An end tag has a less than followed by a slash followed by the name followed by a greater than. So for this start tag of this element, we have this end tag, which would be the end tag for concept. An empty element, and please pay attention to this because a lot of students, not a lot, but sometimes they get confused about empty elements and sometimes get that question wrong on the quiz. An empty element has a greater than character followed by a name, followed by 0 or more attributes, followed by a space, followed by a slash character, followed by a greater than sign. So here's an example of an empty element. It doesn't have a start tag or an empty or an end tag. It just has one tag, but the way we know that it's an empty element is that it has this after the name, it has a space and it has the slash followed by a greater than. Element construction. An element, non-empty that is a start tag and an end tag and everything between, which can be other elements, text, or attributes. It could also be XML comments, processing instruction, CData sections, but these are intentionally omitted from this class. It's not within the scope of this class. So for this class, let's just say that within an element we can have either nothing or other elements or text or attributes or a combination of those. An empty element is an element with no content. The representation of an empty element is that there's either a start tag immediately followed by an end tag or an empty element tag, and that's defined here at the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium URL shown on that screen. So these are examples of elements. In each of these bullets, never mind the bullet is not part of the element, but for example, paragraph, hello world, end tag paragraph is an element. Document with an attribute of ID with nested elements, term, end term, some text, an empty element here, some more text, a start tag, an end tag, some more text, and then this document close tag. This is an element. From here, document start, to here, document end is an element. An empty element, this is an empty element because we see that it has this trailing slash followed by the trailing greater than sign. But in this particular case, different than the empty element we saw before, this is an image element and it has attributes. It has a source attribute with a value and it has an alt attribute with a value. The following bullet is not an element. This is not an element because it just has a start tag and we don't see its end tag, therefore it's not an element. It's just a start tag. So let's talk about attributes. An attribute is information about its host element. An XML attribute may have 0 or 1, an XML element may have 0 or more attributes. An attribute, when present, is part of the start tag. Attributes have names. Names must begin with a letter, certain Unicode value defined here in this URL. An underscore or a colon can optionally be followed by any combination of letters, digits, underscores, colons, and periods. An attribute has a name followed by an equal sign character followed by either a single or a double quote. Sometimes people call this apostrophe. In programming we call it a single quote, and in programming we call this a double quote. Followed by a value, followed by the matching single or double quote. Examples are ID equals C1 or name equals Telecaster. See, we have an example here with a double quote and an example here with a single quote. They both mean the same thing, and they're both valid. Elements versus attribute. My rule of thumb is that the element is the noun and the attribute is the adjective. So if my element name is apple, then I have attributes which are, so I think of apple as being the noun, and I think of the attributes as being the adjectives. Apple has a size, in this case it's medium. It has a price, in this case it's inexpensive. So other parts worth mentioning. For purposes of this class, it's important to know the names and syntax, but not important to know the definitions or uses of these other things. So we have this thing at the top of every XML file called an XML declaration. You can see that it has a less than, question mark, XML, and version. It always has those, and then it ends with a question mark and a greater than sign. We have a doctype declaration. In this case, we have a system identifier, so we have a doctype. It has the angle, the less than, the exclamation point. In programming, we call that angle bang, and then the word all uppercase doctype with the name of the doctype. And in this case, we're saying it's a system identifier versus public identifier, and that the actual DTD, the doctype, is here, and it's called class.dtd. We'll get into more of that later in the class, but this is just to show you the syntax. An XML comment is angle bang dash dash some content and then dash dash angle. That's so that you can put comments in your XML and they are not rendered, nor do they cause any harm, nor are they processed. A processing instruction has an angle, question mark, name, and some text, and then question mark, and then angle. C data section is a character data. It's got this syntax that's pretty unique. Oops, I just advanced the slide. All you need to know is that there is such a thing as C data sections. We won't go into C data sections, processing instructions, comments in this class. Just good to know what they are. So if we put it all together, here's an XML file that has all of those things, or most of those things. It starts off with the XML declaration. It has a doctype definition called apple. It's a system identifier, and it resolves to this apple.dtd. It has the, and the DTD has the rules, and presumably this file follows those rules. It has the root element of apple, and this element has a size attribute of medium and a price attribute of inexpensive. It also has some nested elements in here. These are paragraph tags nested within the, or excuse me, these are paragraph elements nested within the apple element. And it also has an XML comment. And I see that there's a typo here because this should be angle bang dash dash, but it only has one dash, so this actually would not be well formed. That's interesting. I didn't notice that until just now. I'll fix that slide for subsequent classes. So, well-formed versus valid. So you will need to know the difference between valid XML and well-formed XML. Why do we care? Web content providers create and interact with several XML vocabularies that require the syntax to be valid. HTML files that are not valid will cause problems for the content management systems and in some cases display improperly. Data files that are malformed or invalid will not process. Translation files like xlif, tmx, and tbx will not process. Despite how good the tools are, there will come a time in most content providers' careers that they will need to troubleshoot malformed or invalid XML. So let's find out what the difference is. An XML document with correct syntax, as defined here in this URL of the W3C World Wide Web Consortium, is minimally considered to be well-formed. An XML document that is validated against an XML schema or a DTD, doctype definition, is well-formed and valid, and the definition for that is here at this World Wide Web Consortium URL. You don't need to know all the details, but I'll go over the things that you really do need to know about for this class. So, well-formed means that we have a begin tag, and the begin, end, and empty element tags that are delimited are correctly nested with none missing and none overlapping. So what I mean by that is we have this paragraph tag, and it has these properly nested. It has a bold start tag and an end tag, and within that bold tag we have a nested italics tag, open and close tag, and then finally we have the terminating paragraph end tag. This is correct. It's well formed. The second example is not correct, and it's not well formed because we have the start of a B tag, the start of an I tag, but the B tag terminates before the I tag, so the I tag is not properly nested within the B tag, so that's malformed. Elements are case sensitive. The beginning and end tags must match exactly, so this is a well-formed element. The paragraph tag and the paragraph tag match each other. In this case, this is malformed because the paragraph tag start tag is a lowercase p, but the end tag is an uppercase P. Tags cannot contain any of these characters, nor a space character, and cannot start with a dash, period, or numeric digit. So this case here, the H1 tag is correct. Also this H-plus-1 is correct or well formed. In this case, we have a malformed incorrect because it starts with a digit, and we cannot start with digits. This is also incorrect because we have a plus sign here, and plus is one of the forbidden characters in XML names. There's a single root element that contains all of the other elements. So in this case, HTML is the root element, and it contains all of the other elements. In this case, we have a malformed example because we have our HTML root tag, which terminates, and then we have another new element that starts outside of the terminated root element. So this is these are malformed. No attribute may appear more than once in a start tag. So here's a well-formed paragraph with exactly one attribute called style. Here's a malformed where we have a paragraph tag that has two style attributes. XML reserved character ampersand and less than must be escaped as amp and LT. So this is well formed. Grapes and apples are less than $2 a pound. This is incorrect because we have an inescaped. We have an ampersand that's not represented as amp, and we have a less than that's not represented as less than. Content must be delimited with beginning and end tags. So we have an example of HTML start tag and end tag, and a nested paragraph start tag and end tag. In this case, this is a correct example, but in this case we have an incorrect or malformed example because we have the elements, but we have text which precedes the element, the root element, and extends beyond the terminating root element. So that's malformed. attributes delimited with a quotation, either single or double quotes. So in this case, and you see this a lot, by the way, in malformed HTML. A lot of the browsers will accept it, but it's not well formed. We have a paragraph with nicely quoted attributes, and in this case we have a paragraph with style, but the attribute is not quoted. Therefore, it is malformed. Content creates only proper legal Unicode characters. In this case, we have a proper Unicode character, and in this case, we have a forbidden Unicode character. By the way, students are not expected to know which Unicode characters fall outside the legal range. I was just adding this for completeness. That will not be on the quiz. All entities except for amp, less than, greater than, apostrophe, and quote must be declared. Those are keywords, so they're understood. So for example, if I have an entity called university, I need to declare it in the doctype declaration. So if we have this sentence that says students go to amp university semicolon, it would be incorrect to have a DTD that did not declare that that attribute. So in this case, we have an internal DTD which does have the entity declaration, which makes this entity legal or well-formed. In this case, we have a doctype declaration, internal doctype declaration that does not include the entity. Therefore, this entity is not declared or defined. So it makes it malformed. Whew, that was a lot. We won't get into a lot of detail about well-formed. Just suffice it to say that XML documents, every XML document must be well-formed. So let's do a test. Let's do another exercise. Create your XML workshop, install a good text editor, unzip your XML folder, and copy the contents of the unzipped file into your Web Tools for Content Providers XML folder. Be careful to only copy the contents and not the folder itself. That can be kind of tricky. The next step then will be to navigate to that directory and open a simple text editor, or open the XML, simple.xml in a text editor, and I'll show you how to do that. Then we will, step 5, we will go to this URL, xmlvalidation.com. We will copy the simple.xml text, and then we will paste it into the field, or the space here, and then we will click the validate button, and then we will observe our results. And then we will do the file upload method. So in that case, we'll click the choose file. We'll choose our simple.xml file, and then we'll observe that no errors were found. Okay, so let's escape this. Let's go back up to the beginning. Okay, so we're going to do each of these. So first of all, we've installed our good text editor. In my case, I have Notepad++ here in Windows. And then I'm going to follow the instructions. So I'm going to unzip my XML file, and I'm going to copy it into the XML directory that I just created in the last exercise. Okay, so let's go to our Web Tools for Content Providers directory, and let's go into our Downloads folder, and let's find our XML zip file. So here it is. In Windows, you can do an extract all. And I'm just going to say OK. In Mac, you just double click and you'll have your file. So here we have XML, and it did create a second XML directory, so I want to click into that, and it created a third one. And finally, I have my DTD, extras, and XSL. So I'm going to select all 3 of these, and I'm going to Control-C, copy. In Windows, it's in Mac, it's Command-C. So I've copied these 3. Then I'm going to go back into my WT4CP directory. I'm going to click into my XML directory, And I'm just going to paste these by going Control V. And I've pasted the folders into the XML folder. And of course you'll want to pause this and do all of these steps yourself. And then I'm going to open this simple.xml file in my text editor. So I'm going to go into, that's in XML.dtd. So I'll go into DTD. And indeed I see something called simple.xml. So I'm going to open my Notepad++, and I'm just going to drag this file into my text editor, and it opens it in a separate tab, and now I see that I have this XML file called simple.xml. It doesn't have an XML declaration. XML declarations are optional, but this is a well-formed XML file. And the nice thing about these text editors is they can, if you click on the paragraph tag, it shows you where the start and end tags are. That's pretty handy. Okay, so step 4 we've done. Let's go to step 5. We're going to go into this XML validation. Okay, so there's a lot of these commercials, so yeah, don't worry about that. So here's where we're going to copy and paste. So according to my instructions, I go back into my my text editor to my simple.xml file. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to do Control-C. In Mac, it's Command-C, and I'm going to then say Control-V. So now I have the XML document pasted there, and I'm going to validate. So I click the Validate button, and I will observe that I got back this message that says no errors were found. So that's a success. So now I'm going to go back to, I'm going to backspace over these words, hit backspace, and I'm going to enter, and that will get me right back to my XML validation screen for the next exercise. So the next exercise then, we completed all of these steps. The next exercise is to actually upload, do the file upload method. So I'm going to choose file and then validate. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the website, and I'm going to say choose file, and I'm going to navigate to my desktop, to my web tools for content providers, to my XML, into my DTD, and I'm going to choose this file called simple.xml. I'm going to open it. Okay, so it says that it has that file here, and then I'm going to click validate. And I'm going to scroll down and observe that the XML document was there and that no errors were found. That tells me that my XML file is indeed well formed. Just for fun, you don't have to do this, but if I had an XML file that was not well formed, if I, for example, pasted this in again, still have it on my clipboard, or maybe, I guess I do, and I'll do something that makes it not well formed, so I'll put in two attributes, ID equals A1, and then put a second attribute of the same name, which is not legal, which makes it malformed, B1. So this is not well formed. So now if I say validate, it gives me these errors, that an error has been found. Attribute ID was already specified, so the fact that it saw it the second time made it tell us that it was that it failed validation, that it's not well formed. You don't have to do that part. I just wanted to demonstrate to you what it would look like in cases where we did not have a valid XML file or a well-formed XML file. Okay, so let's go back into presentation mode here. So that is well-formed. What about valid? XML files with a doctype declaration or a schema declaration must validate against their DTD or their XML schema. For this class, we will only discuss DTD validation and only a very basic structure. So a file without a doctype declaration does not have to validate against a DTD. So in this case, we looked at our simple document, and it does not have a doctype declaration. Therefore, it does not need to validate against a doctype declaration. An XML file with an internal declaration looks like this. It has the XML declaration. It has a doctype declaration. In this case, the doctype or the DTD is actually embedded within the file. They're usually not, but I'm going to start off with that example. So in this case, we have a doctype class. It says that we have an element. The root element is class, and it has exactly one paragraph tag. And then the element paragraph is parsable character data. So this is valid because we have a start tag and an end tag, and we have a nested p tag that has text. We haven't talked about attributes or any kind of complex nesting, but this is just an example of an internal DTD. An external DTD, this is much more common. You would see that you have your XML declaration, you have a doctype declaration that has a name, and in this case it's system, it's a system identifier, and then it says that this DTD needs to be adjacent to this XML file, and that's where we go to get the rules to find out if all of this is valid. So what about that DTD? The external DTD that was referred to in this case refers to an external file in the same directory, in this case, as the XML file called psuclass.dtd. So psuclass.dtd has the following declaration. We have the root, which is PSU class. It has exactly one intro followed by exactly one conclusion. Intro contains parsable character data, in other words text, and conclusion has parsable character data. And we also have an entity called university, and its value is Portland State University. And this is the literal decoding, what I basically just said. So let's do another exercise. Let's validate with an external DTD. So we'll copy the XML from the slide we saw a minute ago. We'll paste it into the to the file area, and then we'll press validate. But something really cool will happen. Once we press validate, we'll see a prompt asking us to include the DTD file. We'll have the option of either choosing a file or just pasting it in. In this case, we'll just copy the DTD and we'll paste it into that window, and then we'll click validate, and we'll observe that it saw the XML file, it saw the DTD, and no errors were found. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's go in. First of all, let's go to this slide. So that was a couple of slides ago. We'll go up to that. So that is slide, is this it? I think it is, yeah. So we will copy this from the root element, from the XML declaration to the root element, and we'll Control-C, copy. On the Mac, it's Apple-C or Command-C. And then we will go to our tool, our website, and we will paste the doctype declaration in there, or excuse me, the XML file. Notice that there's a extra carriage return here. So I'm just going to backspace, being careful not to backspace over this greater than sign, just to be careful. And then I'm going to validate. And it's going to prompt me for the DTD. The file psuclass.dtd is being referenced. Please copy it here so that the validation can continue. Okay, so I'll go back to my presentation, and I'm going to go then down to the DTD, which is here, and I'm going to copy everything from here to here, and I'm going to Control C, and then I'm going to go back into my file, to my web page, and I'm going to paste it. And again, you see that there's this extra carriage return. I'm just going to backspace so that I just have that at the end of the greater than sign, being careful not to backspace over that greater than sign. And then I'm going to say continue validation. And it tells us that it indeed saw the XML document, it indeed saw the doctype declaration, and no errors were found. So that's great. I'm going to go back here, just backspace like I usually do. Enter, so I get a fresh screen. Okay, so we've completed the second exercise, and now we're going to go into something really fun. I think is really fun. Oh, we have to finish out our yeah, spoiler alert, we're going to go into XSL, which I think is really cool. But for now, let's finish out the DTD. So we have a DTD syntax for sequences and choices. And elements content model, we can indicate that child elements may occur in order with a comma. So in this case, we have an element called doc, and we're saying that it has exactly one start tag followed by exactly one middle tag followed by exactly one conclusion. Or we can use pipe. The pipe means or. So in this case, we're saying that we have an element called doc. It has a start or a middle or a conclude. That means it has to have start, middle, and conclude, but they can be in any order. And it needs to be exactly one. We also have syntax for cardinality. That means that there are 4 cardinality indicators that show how many times an element can appear in a content model. No indicator means that an element must appear exactly one time. A question mark means that it can appear 0 or 1 time. A plus sign means that it has to appear 1 or more times. And an asterisk means it can appear 0 or more times. People call that the optional. Okay, so mixing text and elements. To declare an element that can have both text and child elements or nested elements, the content model must use exactly the following syntax. So in this case, we're saying that document can have text or nested elements. We have to say it must start off with PC data, pipe, element name, pipe, element name, followed by an asterisk. The attribute syntax in DTDs is a little bit different. Attributes can be assigned to several different data types and default values. For this class, we will only deal with text that has the data type of CData with no default. An attribute declaration includes the element name, the attribute name or names, and the attribute type or types, and the attribute value declaration. So let's look at an example. So it starts off with angle, bang, at list, and then the name of the element for which the attribute can appear, then the name of the attribute's type. And remember, we said we're always going to have C data, character data, and then implied means it's optional, or required means you must have it. Okay, so let's put it all together. Here we have the doctype, the doc DTD. It has the content model for the element of doc, which we talked about before, but in this case it has an attribute called number. Number is character data and it's implied or optional. So that means with your doc element you can have an attribute called number or skip the attribute called number. And then for start we have the content model that we talked about, but in this case for start we're required to have a version attribute and we have an optional number attribute. And then middle, conclude, and paragraph do not have any attributes. Okay, so what does that look like? So that means this is valid, because it follows those rules, we have the required version attribute and the optional number attribute for doc and for start. This is not valid because we have we're allowed to have 2 start elements, that's fine, but in this case we have the let's look back at the DTD and find out why this is not valid. I'd forgotten. So we have number, which is required, and version is required and number is implied. So in this particular invalid, oops, I'm going the wrong way. In this particular invalid example, we have version, but in the second one we have number, which is optional, and version is required, and it does not appear there. I guess I didn't need to look it up. I just read it right here. Okay. I was distracted because my phone just rang and I was looking at my watch to see who called, but it wasn't a number that I recognized, so that's okay. Okay, so that's DTD, well-formed versus valid. And now, as promised, some fun stuff, XSL. XSL is fun because you can use XSL as almost like a programming language to convert existing XML into a different form of XML or into an actual text file. So let's see what's all this XML or this XSL stuff that that is claimed to be so much fun. XSL stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language. Its rules are here at this URL on the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. XSL is a family of recommendations for defining XML file transformations and presentation, consisting of 3 parts. XSL, which is Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformation. XPath, which is used by XSLT and many others to refer to parts of an XML document. Or XSLFO, XML Formatting Objects. This is basically how we apply formatting to XML files. That will become important when we start to talk about DITA, but we're not going to talk much about it in this class. A style sheet gives an unfortunate limiting connotation. The XSL standard, XSL is the standard with which DITA is published. As I said, when we get into our DITA module, we'll learn more about that. Why do we care? Content providers more and more create content in DITA. Their tools transform the DITA to HTML and PDF. DITA projects are transformed to output in nearly all cases versus XSL. There are no 100% foolproof transformations that work in all scenarios. Despite how well your team or your vendor writes the XSL, there will likely be cases where code will need to be adjusted. Content providers manage content translations using XML tools and XML standards. DITA and HTML often transform to XLIF for translation. Translated XLIF is often transformed back into DITA or HTML. Okay, so the XSL workflow goes something like this. You begin with your source XML file and a desired target or text format. You write an XSLT that will transform the source to the target. You apply XSL processing, sometimes via an automated sometimes automated via an XML tool, or sometimes you can run it from the command line, and then you observe the resulting file. So this is an example of a command line transformation. We have a working directory. In this we have an XSL processor. In our case we'll be using Saxon 9. We have a source XML file, and then we have an XSL script that is going to transform our XML into our target desired. So if we have a source file called class.xml, and we have an XSL script that does things to each of those elements, in this case we're taking we're turning a proprietary XML format into into HTML. This is a very common scenario. So then we would enter the XSL processor command at the command line, which is here, and then the result would be an HTML file, which we could view in our browser. So let's do that. Let's do that actual exercise. So we've already created our workspace, but we're going to create our XSL workspace. So we will navigate to our XSL directory. Okay, so we're in XML, and we navigate to XSL, and we are going to observe that there's a class.xml file here and a class.xsl file here, and we're going to view each of those in our text editor. So in my case, I have Notepad++. So first of all, I'm going to observe the class.xml. I'm just going to drag it in there, and I see that it has a an XML declaration. It does not have a doctype declaration, so it does not need to be validated. And then it has a start tag and an end tag. It has nested intro and nested conclusion, and we have a nested emphasis tag, and we have some text. Okay, let's look at the XSL file. The XSL file is telling us that when you see this PSU class element, our root element, transform that into HTML and then apply templates. In other words, apply the existing templates that are nested within that. One of those is intro. When you find intro, turn that into a paragraph tag and apply the templates. When you find conclusion, turn that into a paragraph tag and apply templates. And when you find an emphasis, transform that into a bullet tag, or excuse me, a bold tag, and then apply templates. So that's what we observed. Now we will invoke our command line and then navigate to our Web Tools XML XSL directory. The way you get your command line is in Windows, you can go into Accessories and get the command prompt. In the Mac, you go into your Utilities and you double-click your Terminal app. And this is a case where it's good to know a little bit about the command line. Those URLs that I mentioned to you contain good information on learning about, they are tutorials for learning about how to use the command line. Okay, and then in Windows 10 you go into your Windows system and click the command line, and then we will we will type our syntax here, and then we will observe our resulting class.html file. You'll notice that there is not a class.html file in this directory yet, but once we go through this exercise we will. So the first thing we need to do, in this case I'm using Windows, so Windows 10, so I'm going to scroll down into my Microsoft system Windows system, and I'm going to click there, and I'm going to get my command prompt, and my command prompt comes to my user directory. So if I do a dir in Windows, it would be ls or pwd ls. So then I see that I need to get to my desktop. So my desktop is here, so I'm going to type cd space desktop. It gets me to my desktop. I'll do a dir. In Windows you would do ls, and then I see that my WT4CP folder is right there, so I'm going to do a cd and go into WT4CP, enter. I'll do a dir, and I see that I have XML, so I'll cd into XML, enter. I'll do a dir, and I see that I have XSL, so I'll do a cd space XSL, enter. It'll do dir, and that's where I find that I have my class.xml file and my class.xsl file. So if I go back to looking at the syntax, I see that I need to type, without any typos, JAVA, Java, space, minus JAR, space, SAXON9.jar, space, minus O for output. I'm going to call it class.html html space, my input file is class.xml space, and my XSLT transformation program file is class.xsl. And if I didn't make any mistakes, I press my enter and I will not see any errors. Good. And I get the command prompt back. So now if I go back into that directory, all of a sudden I see that I do indeed have a class.xml HTML file. That's new. If I go to my browser and I drag that file into my browser, I see that I have that same XML file, but now I am reading it as bold, and that it did create paragraph tags. If I want to right click just to do my view page source, indeed I see that I have HTML, P, B, and closing HTML tag. So that's it. We've completed this week's slides. We've completed the exercises. If you have any trouble or if any of this didn't work for you, please don't be frustrated. Please, well, you can be a little frustrated, but I will relieve that frustration by happily walking you through any problem.